And each year I try to diversify everything that I offer and get speakers for. We have a lovely year planned so far this year with a variety of almost everything on that list. The other part of my duties, and this is where everybody enjoyed the refreshments, a small few help. I would love to have more people help donate some or part of the refreshment table that they kindly give us in that side room. So I would like to have you look at the website and volunteer to bring refreshments, just so long as I know who it is and I can double check with you before you arrive. Thank you very, very much, because I know we enjoyed the time to socialize. In March...
And that can be reimbursed, right?
Absolutely, can be reimbursed. Yeah. On March 21st, Alan Agrawal, who is a member of the Antique Telescope Society, where their members go to sites and museums around the world, is going to give a very exciting talk on Galileo, his telescopes and observations, and how that was the great inflection point in the history of science. His telescope observations changed our understanding of the universe and our place in it, and he is correctly called the father of modern science. In April, we're going to have Dr. Roger Blandford. He is the first director of KIPAC, KIPAC. You're going to hear that from time to time as I introduce speakers this year. KIPAC means the Kavli Institute of Particle Astrophysics and Cosmology, and he was the first director of the institution at Stanford. He's going to talk about neutron stars and pulsars, the inside story. So they were predicted in the 30s and discovered in the 60s. Neutron stars are the result of massive stellar evolution, and a small fraction of these create something called pulsars. So we're going to hear that from Roger Blandford on April the 18th. You're going to learn a little bit in this introduction to Brian Kruse about the variety of things that are available in the Bay Area that are education opportunities. And Brian represents a great many things that are available. He got a telescope in junior high and saw Saturn and developed an interest in astronomy. In 1996, Hale-Bopp comet was in the sky, and he said that experience, more than any other, got him hooked. He is the director of the Teacher Learning Center and Formal Education Programs at the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, another combo that you're going to hear about this year from time to time, ASP. He manages and coordinates the programs, and including Project Astro, National Network, and the Bay Area Project Astro with the ASP. He also writes Education Matters column for the ASP. With CosmoQuest and NASA Night Sky Network teams, he works to engage people in space science through webinars and citizen science projects. He also edits the online newsletter, The Universe in a Classroom. He's a veteran classroom teacher. He taught middle and high school physics, earth science, and physical sciences. He has served for 3 years as coordinator for the NASA Explorer Schools project at NASA Ames. His degrees are in geology and aviation and space science. He holds a teaching credential in physics, geoscience, and biological sciences, and is particularly interested in how people learn and how teachers incorporate this with a more learning-based inquiry system. He's a regional director of the National Science Education Leadership Association, and he's on the board of directors with the San Francisco Amateur Astronomers. His name was up there. We're going to talk about Mars tonight. Mars has long been an object of intense interest in ancient and modern times, and its ruddy glow has inspired visions of conflict and war. And its surface markings created a whole genre of misrepresentations of what Mars looks like, or what Mars is, rather. In this presentation, we will discover how popular culture has imagined Mars over time. But NASA's missions have returned a plethora of images and information about what Mars really is like. And we will learn about the latest discoveries from the planet most similar to Earth, and what still remains for investigation and discovery in future missions. Join me in welcoming Brian Kruse.
shifting to do here, but oh, that's right, I need to press the magic red button. Thank you. You didn't know that we're going to be immortalized here. Actually, all of these get recorded and videotaped, and I believe that they end up someplace on the SFAA website. Is that right, PJ?
Correct.
Okay, so you can find these, and actually there's a lot of other ones. Linda mentioned the ASP. We've got a lot of webinars. We have the San Francisco Amateur Astronomers is a member club of the NASA Night Sky Network, and we have over 400 clubs nationwide. And we have monthly webinars, and we just had one last week with Dana Bachman from the NASA SOFIA mission. Next month, we're going to be hearing from Amy Shera Title about, Hidden Figures was quite the movie with some spectacularly talented women who no one heard about really until the movie came out. And so there was another set of women about the same time who were actually accepted into the Mercury astronaut program and went through training. They didn't fly, of course, or else we would have heard about them. And so Amy's written a really nice book about that. But we're here to talk about Mars a little bit, and so let's just kind of see if this works. I decided that after listening to statistics, we should lighten up just a little bit before we get into the main part here.
Have you ever said,
I'd like to grow vegetables on Mars, but the soil is just no good.
not anymore? Now, thanks to Martian Farmer, old, rocky, lifeless Martian soil can become a garden paradise.
It's amazing.
Martian Farmer adds all the necessary ingredients to grow flowers, plants, and even vegetables.
I grew this prize-winning tomato thanks to Martian Farmer.
Martian Farmer has a special ingredient that absorbs the heat of the sun, making permafrost a thing of the past.
Who knew that you could have a green thumb on such a red planet? Thanks, Martian Farmer.
There's only one planet Mars, and there's only one fertilizer for Martian soil. Martian Farmer. Martian Farmer! Seeds, grape, origin, K-suit, Martian lander, and Martian habitat not included. Results are not typical and may vary as sun sets on Mars and as Mars enters Martian winter.
So who do you think produced that? About 15 years ago, NASA had quite an interesting education director down at the Johnson Space Center who produced a whole lot of these fun little videos. So, a little bit about the ASP. We are probably the oldest unknown organization in San Francisco. 2 weeks ago, we celebrated our 128th anniversary. How many of you have heard of us before tonight? Okay, a few of you, but not that many. We're rather unknown, mainly because we don't do anything with the general public. We do a lot of professional development and resource development for the intermediaries, and so we work with other people to help them do a better job of doing outreach. And so we have a lot of things, Project Astro, we have the Teacher Learning Center, we have Astronomy from the Ground Up, which is a great many museum educators and park rangers, and the NASA Night Sky Network, which has over 400 amateur astronomy clubs. So the interesting thing about the ASP is if you turn the clock back to January 1st, 1889, and so right about here was a path of totality for a solar eclipse. Photography was a brand new thing at that point, and no one had really done any astrophotography, and so here's one of the first astrophotographs ever taken. And this is of that eclipse. A group of professional and amateur astronomers decided to make the trek north from San Francisco. It took them 2 days. They went to Cloverdale. Imagine that. How long does it take to get to Cloverdale? So, what was missing then? Yeah, there wasn't the Golden Gate Bridge, and so they had to take the long way around. It took them 2 days, buggies, horses, and whatnot. They had such a wonderful time hanging out together and doing this. They got back to San Francisco and they decided, we're going to form a society. We're going to get together on a regular basis. And so on February 7th, they incorporated the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. And ever since then, we have been striving to make astronomy more accessible to the general public, as well as building bridges between the professional and the amateur communities. Well, one of the places that sometimes we have awareness of for various reasons is this place called Mars. Mars has many names, and so you might see some of the names from some of the different cultures around. But I think that one of the ones here is particularly apt. Today's Tuesday. That means today's Mars Day. So happy Mars Day, everyone. Mars has been known for a very, very long time. It's ruddy glow. They even named another star, Antares, as rival of Mars. Many of us know that. Mars followed along a path with many of its other wandering stars. It didn't stay put. It didn't have the good graces to stay put like the spots in the sky were supposed to. It moved. And not only did it move, but it followed this path through the sky, through the same set of constellations year-round. So, the ancient people, they gave Mars and the other wandering planets various attributes and special attributes. And so they became the gods. And so there became all these legends about what these planets represented. And somehow or other they came up with the notion that where these planets were somehow or another affected our lives here. And so we have the beginnings of astrology many, many years ago. And so Mars was certainly one of those. And here's what Mars was. You know, obviously Mars is a very passionate planet. I mean, here, Mars was a very passionate god, so I guess it was a very passionate planet for us as well. Well, the other thing is that Mars and some of the other planets didn't have the good grace to continue even in a straight line. It had this tendency to loop back on itself and go backwards and then turn back around and go the other direction. And so not only was it following along and not staying put like the fixed stars, but it did these little curlicues, which baffled people for a long time. And so people started trying to make sense out of it. And so we had Ptolemy, was one of the first scientists who attempted to come up with a system that made sense out of the motions of Mars and the motions of some other things. And so he invented things like epicycles and some of these other things that, really kind of bizarre motions, these curlicue motions. Well, later on, in 1543, Copernicus published his book that placed the sun in the center and not the earth, and really kind of changed the way that we looked at where the planets were and looked at where our situation was here in our solar system. It wasn't accepted, right away. A very famous astronomer, Tycho Brahe, came up with an alternative, which was kind of a blending of the Ptolemaic and the Copernican systems, where now we have everything going around the Earth, but everything kind of went around the sun at the same time. And so really this kind of, you have to stare at this for a long time before it makes sense. Eventually you can kind of make sense out of it. And, Tycho accused people of stealing this from him, and he led a rather colorful life, which would be a completely other talk, which I think would be really quite fascinating, this whole thing about where heliocentrism came from, and the history of heliocentrism. Well, a few years after that, Tycho took on a mathematician named Kepler, who took the data from Mars, and it was really the Martian data that Tycho had that was the thing that helped Kepler to develop his three laws of planetary motion, particularly the one having to do with the following ellipses. And so mathematically and geometrically, Kepler was able to put the sun in the center and be able to demonstrate how this was the way that the solar system had to be based on the geometry that he was doing. There still was no direct evidence, direct observational evidence for the sun in the middle, but the geometry appeared to demand that the sun was in the middle. And this was all because he was able to get his hands on the Martian data that Tycho had. And so now we're getting to have some rationale for moving away from the geocentric model of the universe towards a more heliocentric model of the universe. But still, we required some sort of observational proof for why this was true. Well, along comes a few years later, Galileo comes along, and we're going to hear a talk about Galileo here next month, Linda. And this is going to be really, really interesting, because all these observations of Galileo are tremendously important. He looked at Jupiter, and over the space of just a few nights was able to infer that these four stars that were in a line moved. And his inference was, and this is a grand leap. There was no reason for him to leap there, but he did it. That they were going around Jupiter and not just going in a straight line back and forth. Likewise, he turned his telescope to Venus, and he discovered that Venus had phases. Finally, we have basically what is the smoking gun for putting the sun in the middle. It was the pattern of the phases of Venus were really the proof that were necessary, because the only way that you could have this pattern of phases that Venus was demonstrating, by putting the sun in the middle and putting Venus going around the sun interior of where the Earth was, not exterior, like where Mars was.
Hey, Brian.
Yes, sir.
And right now, for the next month, if you get a telescope or a steadily held pair of binoculars on Venus, you can see crescent Venus.
Absolutely, you can. And that's one of the great things about Venus is that it's so accessible. And a good pair of binoculars, you can recreate Galileo's observations, and probably with better resolution than what he had. Anyone in here ever built a Galileo scope? Ever built one of those? It was built for the International Year of Astronomy in 2009. A lot of teachers have it. They made literally tens of thousands of these things. And you look through it, and it's patterned off of Galileo's telescopes. And it's a marvelous instrument for what it is. And it is way better than what Galileo had. And this is just this little plastic thing, although it has good glass lenses in it. So, a story for another day, though. So now we finally pretty much have settled science that we can put the sun in the middle and not the Earth. And so this is the configuration that we recognize, that we continue to recognize up to the present day. And so a lot of people might think, well, gee, we're not sure that we like that. That kind of ruins our worldview. Well, some people continue to not like it, and so, there are some people that think that we should be teaching the controversy. Okay, well, let's go for it. Let's teach this controversy. And if you like believing some of the basketball stars, this one all of a sudden is making a comeback. So maybe we should teach this controversy too. We won't mention who that is. He's for that other team that we don't much care for. Well, right about that time, a little bit later, after all this, a guy named Christian Huygens took a telescope, and Galileo looked at Mars. Mars, but he really didn't record too much about it. He, had other things. If he did, we really don't have those records, although he kept very meticulous records. So Huygens is pretty much credited with the first drawing of Mars through a telescope. Not bad for 1659, with just a cheap telescope. To our thought, a cheap and fairly ineffective telescope. The next century, Herschel drew a little bit more detailed drawing of Mars. A century later, Trouvelot comes up with something, this is pretty stylistic. I think that he took a little bit of artistic license with this. It's amazing how things look. About the same time, a guy named Schiaparelli drew a relatively faithful rendition of Mars. The problem is, about a decade later, he added a few things that, were somewhat problematic, and used the unfortunate word in Italian, canale. It's a very good word. However, translated into English, if you think of the word canal, what do we think of when we think of the word canal? Is that a natural feature? Or is it an engineered feature? Usually when we think of the word canal, we think that, but canale should have been translated as channel, not as canal. And so rivers have channels. Rivers don't follow canals. And so now that we've got this word canal, it's kind of like, now it's entered into our thoughts that, there's something engineered up on Mars. Lowell, a little over 100 years ago, he kind of grabbed onto this, and he was somewhat obsessed with this idea that there were canals and beams on Mars and whatnot. A few years before that, H.G. Wells had written a story about that. You probably heard about this, The War of the Worlds. It's really the first time that Mars ended up in fiction in this way, and posited that there were some beings that were rather warlike. After all, Mars is the war planet. It's red. It's the color of blood. And so whoever lives there must be warlike. It didn't help matters much when a few years later, a guy named Henrique Alvin Correa drew a bunch of drawings based on Wells' book. And they were subsequently used to illustrate other editions of Wells's book. And so this kind of colored the thinking of the day, that, this is how aliens are. This is how these people on other planets are. And they couldn't think, that the thought that there would be a planet without potentially some other beings on it, that was just unheard of. There had to be other people on these other planets. Well, around about that time, we now have something called movies, moving pictures. And so it didn't take too long for Mars to show up in these movies. So here we've got the first one in 1910. It was actually one of the first silent movies ever made. And it was very, very short. And it was called A Trip to Mars. And basically, this special powder ended up, if you got this, encased in this, it would magically spirit you off to Mars. And then here we've got the being on Mars blowing it back on the scientist. The scientist fits in this guy's hand. It's really, really tiny. And so ended up coming back to Earth and was able to share his stories. And basically, don't go there anymore. There's this big evil giant who's going to just send you back anyway. Well, it wasn't too awful. A couple years later, we have a little bit different vision of Mars. And so, I don't know about you, but as a teenage boy thinking about John Carter with the voluptuous Dejah Thoris, who wouldn't want to read these books, So Barsoom enters our culture. And Edgar Rice Burroughs. How many of you read Burroughs when you were a kid? Okay. Maybe you read Burroughs and you didn't know it. What more famous person? Tarzan. Well, a couple of years later, and we were talking about this earlier, about some of these films, some of these old silent films that are on YouTube. You could actually find that Trip to Mars on YouTube if you really felt like it. It's very, very short. I think it's only about 5 minutes long. This one, a Trip to Mars, but this is a Danish film, which was silent, and it came out. And I really like what it says here. You know, it's an all-star cast. You know, 5,000 actors, 50 gorgeous setting. $100,000 mechanical, you know, this is a big budget film. And their spacecraft was called Excelsior. And so they went to Mars and they found up on Mars, they found this peaceful culture living, you know, going out to these temples and whatnot, and they introduced murder to Mars. The evil people took these, and I think that there was a misunderstanding. But you could watch this, the subtitles, the reader boards are in Danish, but the one that I saw had the translation on it, so that you don't have to actually read Danish to be able to understand this. A couple years later, the Soviet Union, or someone in Russia, came up with another one called Elita. And so this was a classic of the time, and it has to do with, basically it was a big dream sequence that this person goes to Mars and encounters the lovely Elita, Queen of Mars, and her nefarious advisors that you can see down there wearing very nefarious helmets. And so it's had various adventures and then managed to wake up and decide that his life wasn't so bad after all. A few years later, another famous rendition of Mars came into our thoughts, Malacandra, named by C.S. Lewis, and Out of the Silent Planet. And in the same year, Wells does Wells. We have the infamous War of the Worlds broadcast that terrified a good many people and made them think that, oh gosh, this is real stuff. The Martians are coming to kill us. And of course, people were thinking of those Korea diagrams and drawings that had appeared in Wells's book in one of his editions. Fake news, yes, it's the original fake news. Well, a few years later, I think that everyone, we talked about this at dinner this evening, about how Ray Bradbury was a rather important author in a great many ways. And so The Martian Chronicles comes out in 1950 and has a variety of stories and casting Mars in a little more positive light, but still, you've got canals, you've got Martians, you've got people there that have engineered things. Well, one of the unfortunate things about the same year, speaking of, fake science, we had a book called Worlds in Collision came out with Velikovsky, who posited that Mars was following this odd orbit and it crossed the orbit of Earth from time to time, and that this was the cause of many of the calamities that were written up in the Old Testament, and that this close approaches of Mars were what caused all these calamities. Of course, ignoring all that one could know about orbital mechanics and the actual effects of having a body that close gravitationally, that it would probably do a whole lot more than just destroy civilizations, and actually would result in much greater disruptions to both planets. And so meanwhile, today, both planets are, we would see the residuals of this in the orbits of the planets. We would be able to identify it. We haven't seen anything. So, there's so many reasons to debunk Velikovsky. So now we kind of enter into the golden age of the representation of Mars and the golden age of science fiction, and we start off with Flight to Mars. And then, of course, the comedians had to get in the act, and so we have Abbott and Costello go to Mars, but they never actually went to Mars. They went to Venus. So why they named it, they go to Mars when they never, no one goes to Mars in that film. And then finally in 1953, we end up with a rendition, an on cinema of the War of the Worlds. And again, taking many of the images that had come from Korea's drawings back almost 50 years before now. 1950 was 53. I would contend that the very most important cultural icon of Mars finally had a name. Although this cultural icon first appeared 5 years earlier, but finally we have Marvin the Martian. Has a name. Who could disagree that this is the most iconic Martian that we've ever come up with? After all, where is the canoe? Towards the end of the decade, 1959, there's a movie that many say is the worst movie that's ever been produced, Plan 9 from Outer Space. I would contend that The Angry Red Planet would be a contender for that. Anyone seen The Angry Red Planet? You probably have. You could think of it as this giant red spider from Mars. Basically, these people go up and do things, and then it turns out that there's this all-powerful being on Mars that basically gives them a scolding and sends them home and says, "Don't ever come back again." So it's in 1961. We all learned what it means to grok. Stranger in a strange land. I think I read someplace that it's one of the 80 most influential books in American culture. Perhaps more important than this Martian, Michael Valentine Smith definitely was not my favorite, or my favorite Martian, Uncle something. What was his name? Uncle something. Uncle Martin, that's right, thank you. Round about the same time, I have to admit that this was one of my favorite movies when I was growing up. Robinson Crusoe on Mars. He gets cast away up there, has adventures, he finds a native Martian that he takes care of and nurses back to health, and they're able to run around in the atmosphere, although they have to generate oxygen. What I find remarkable about this poster is that it says this on it. It's only one step, remember this, it's only one step ahead of present reality. Well, this is 1964. There's something really, really important that happened in 1964. Same year, guess what? We no longer have to rely on telescopes to see what's going on Mars, because Mariner 4 flies by, returns some images, fairly grainy, not particularly good, but there's no canals. There's a whole bunch of craters, but no canals, no signs of any civilizations or anything like that. Well, it didn't just seem to dissuade the popular media, because the next year we had that all-time winning classic that goes to the top of everyone's best of list, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. Wonderful film. Well, now things are really kind of starting to heat up as far as taking a look at Mars, and so we have a couple more flybys. At the same time we're landing on the moon, we have a couple of spacecraft go by, and they continue to return these images demonstrating that there's not much there. There's the polar caps, there's some craters, there's some plains, certainly nothing that looks like anything that's been engineered or that anyone is there. So the next step, besides just flying by, is now we want to see if we can put something into orbit, and so we do. In 1971, Mars 9 goes into orbit around Mars, but guess what? It shows up in the middle of a global dust storm. You can see absolutely nothing. So it's kind of like, wow, what have we done? How much money have we spent? How long is this going to last? And they can see some little hints of things as the dust starts to settle. And when it finally settles, They're amazed at what they see. Craters, channels, huge valleys that span the distance of a continent. And this is remarkable stuff. So now, there's wonders even perhaps greater than the thought of a bunch of straight lines. Certainly a greater mystery about what's going on Mars, which really kind of set the tone for much later explorations. Later on in the decade, they sent Viking 1 and 2. They had orbiters and landers. Both of them landed successfully, both of them sent back images. Both orbiters operated for not as long as the landers did. One of the landers, and here's the, some of the other images from there. One of the landers, the battery basically expired. The other one, Viking 1, it seemed to be a little more durable until somebody, one of the engineers, sent the wrong command to it, which basically drained the battery right away. And who knows how much longer Viking 1 might have lasted. Certainly longer than 1982, because it was going strong. And so human error caused us to lose contact with one of these very, very important spacecraft. So we continue on with, with these new findings on Mars, and so the popular culture kind of adopted some of these themes, and so we certainly have, the Governator decided to, he made a classic movie. I guess they remade that. Has anyone seen it? Is it any good? I just can't imagine seeing that. Kim Stanley Robinson with an absolutely wonderful trilogy of books with terraforming as a key ingredient. About the same time, we have a little bit different way of thinking about Mars. Can you all read it all the way back? How's your marriage, Tina? Things are much better since Barry moved back to Mars. Mars attacks. I don't know, I still like Marvin the Martian better. But now we're getting more of an opportunity, kind of the idea of going back to Mars. It had been a while. And so, since the Viking landers and orbiters have been there. And so finally we land, and not only did we put a lander down, but we had a little miniature rover that was able to rove around. And of course, the rover only was able to point in one direction, and so who knows what's behind it? Because it didn't have a rear view mirror to look at. Hubble images, we finally get some really good telescopic views, better than what we had up to that point. Views, and if we compare it to some of the previous drawings that have been done a century before, we can see similarities between these, but we can certainly see that there was a lot of embellishment done for cultural purposes. And so we end up having some orbiters that make incredibly detailed maps of the Martian surface. And so we're teasing out features that we could only dream about seeing in the past. Some movies took advantage of this. And so we have Mission to Mars, and we have what some people say is another really bad movie, although I always kind of liked it, Red Planet, where terraforming again was a key ingredient, although little insects chasing Val Kilmer across the surface of Mars, that kind of strains credulity. But Mission to Mars in particular kind of played off of one of the Viking images that it returned. And so you might have seen this at some point. And so what are you supposed to think? You look at this image that was taken, you look down here and you see this face. And what's the only thing that you can conclude? Oh, gee, we were right all along. It's just that the Martians have been dead for a long time, but they know that we were going to be here, and so they've erected this giant pyramid to honor us because we've outlived them. Right? Or we can go back and we can take another look later on and see if it looks the same. Look, higher resolution, make the comparison with the Viking orbiter image down there, and, you know, it's kind of a play of shadows, higher resolution camera, and, you know, the eyes kind of disappearing, we don't quite see it. Okay, let's look at it with the light coming from a different direction. Oh, let's take the images and take a sideways look. Okay, well, our faces kind of disappeared. It's just a big butte with some mountains in there. Yeah. So basically, what we can think of here, we got another cartoon, and, you know, I'll let you read it. So the punchline is that once they finally looked at the evidence, kind of the mystery disappeared. The myth disappeared. They looked at the evidence and they were able to debunk the thoughts about it. Well, we can get pretty good looks. Now, I took this picture of, this is my picture of Mars opposition in 2003. You know, that's not bad with just an 8-inch telescope, with a junky digital camera looking through it, you know. It's not bad. Other people take much better ones because they've got better equipment than I do, and that's okay. Well, the 2003 opposition keeps coming back to haunt us. How many of you know what that means? About a week after the solar eclipse this next summer, this is going to show up again. It shows up once a year. Once a year, this shows up. Oh, yeah, Mars is going to look as large as the full moon. Neglecting to read the entire quote that said that looking through a telescope, Mars will look as big as the full moon to your naked eye. Well, if you conveniently leave a few words out, then it becomes something completely different. And so, you know, this just plain doesn't happen. You know, it won't happen. Maybe in Velikovsky universe this happened, but certainly not in our modern one. Well, in 2004, we had a noteworthy thing. We had twin rovers land. And this is really, really cool stuff. And finally, we're getting to really look and delve into what's going on Mars. Didn't stop us from having really interesting things in culture. You know, Spin. Spin was actually quite a good book. And they have this thing where, you know, somehow or another, Earth is slowed down and the rest of the universe is continuing on a normal pace. And there have been some people that go to Mars. For some reason, books, or some of the more recent ones, that the people on Mars who were from Mars somehow or another become wiser and more knowledgeable than those that were left behind. And Spin was no different. That the culture that evolved on Mars somehow or another became much more highly evolved and much wiser, and could kind of show us up who were left here on Earth and had been kind of stymied and left in several thousand years behind. Well, some other missions, we had Phoenix lander, landed, dug in, and actually was able to get down to some ice. South Pole, North Pole? North Pole, thank you. And so it actually was able to dig down and scrape up some ice. And then in 2012, the Mars Science Laboratory, aka Curiosity, started roving around. And there we have our 3 rovers. And so you can see, here we've got, here's Curiosity, here's Spirit and Opportunity, and here's our lovely little Sojourner. So the really great thing about Curiosity is it's got this scoop, it's got a drill, it's got a scoop, it's got a little chemistry laboratory on board. It can put these things into and analyze them. Had a little problem with that recently. One of them stopped working. I think that they've solved the problem now, or at least they've continued the motion and continued the science investigations. But one of the things too is that Curiosity had a very, very high resolution camera and has given us some really interesting images that some people have found some rather interesting things when they look really, really close at it. And so here we have a nice rat. Obviously it's a rat on Mars. There's no saying whether it's fossilized or not. And obviously there's got to be a finger. So it's, yeah. People will make what they will, won't they? Even Calvin. My powerful brain has come up with a topic for my paper. Right? I'll write about the, it's not Mars, that's okay. I'll write about the debate over Tyrannosaurs. Were they fearsome predators or disgusting scavengers? Which side will you defend? Oh, I believe they are fearsome predators, definitely. How come? They're so much cooler that way. Well, I think that we think about Mars that way too. It's so much cooler to think that there's living things out there, or something that, engineered something. It's so much cooler to think that. And so we still have, this still enters into our popular imagination about these images. And so they butchered Burroughs' books with this. It was moderately entertaining, but But then again, they are actually faithful to what people thought was good science in 1916. And so if you think of it that way, that this movie is portraying what people thought good science and what Mars was like 100 years before, maybe it's not so bad from that standpoint. Certainly, I think that looking at this in the lens of 21st century knowledge makes it more problematic and makes it more difficult to perhaps enjoy. We did enjoy this book, though. And we enjoyed the movie. And virtually everyone says that it was rather faithful to what Mars is actually like. And so now we have a movie that finally is portraying the Mars that our science is really seeing, and what it is that we've discovered, what it is that we now know. We're not done yet. There's more things to find out. In 2014, MAVEN went up, it's orbiting Mars, it's investigating how the solar wind is impacting the Martian atmosphere. And basically how the Martian atmosphere is degraded due to the solar wind. This was supposed to launch last year. It didn't. One of the instruments wasn't sealed properly. And so with a month to go, they were given a deadline to fix it. They couldn't fix it. And so now this is on tap for launching next year. In 2018, this is the InSight mission. It's going to drill a hole, and it's going to investigate the heat flow from the interior of Mars. This will allow them a chance to characterize what the inside of Mars is like. That's one of the big mysteries. What's the inside of planets like? On Earth, we infer what things are like inside our planet based upon rocks that are brought up in volcanic arcs, based on earthquakes and how they are propagated through the Earth. Well, we don't really have that from some of the other planets. We do have earthquake arrays on the Moon, which has given us a pretty good understanding of some of the dynamics that are going on inside the Moon. Also, some of the probes that we've sent around the Moon have investigated the gravity that it tells us a great deal about what's going on inside the Moon. But the inside of Mars is a great mystery. Don't really know what the inside of Mars is like. And this is kind of important. There are some astrobiologists and planetary scientists who say that one of the things that's absolutely essential for life to arise on a planet is for the planet to have plate tectonics. Mars does not have plate tectonics. It does not have a global recycling mechanism that takes the atmosphere and takes it down into the crust, reworks it, and then re-emits it in the volcanic zones. It doesn't have this continually recycling mechanism to replenish the atmosphere on Mars. And therefore, the atmosphere is basically blasted away by the solar wind. In 2020, NASA is going to be launching Mars Rover 2020. You might have noted that just 2 days ago, they released, maybe it's 3 days ago now, they released the last 3 candidate sites. And so now they're down to 3 sites that they're going to choose from. Syrtis Major. This site is, there's a large volcanic edifice here. They're looking at the possibility that there were some hot springs there at one time. They are also looking at this place, Jezero Crater, where there's a delta, where they've identified a variety of different minerals from orbit that they think have potential to have some of the signs of past life, especially because, you know, if you look at it, it looks like a delta. If you think of what a delta looks like, this one looks like a delta. And so that and all the other sedimentary layers there, they think it's a pretty good place to go look. And one of the main goals of Mars Rover 2020 is to determine whether life ever did exist on Mars. If not, determine whether it still exists on Mars. That's rather problematic.
Is that enhanced color or that's not?
Yes, those are enhanced colors. Indeed they are. Representational colors. They're not even enhanced colors. They're representational colors just to bring out the details and from what the sensors were able to detect. So, yeah. One of the 3 finalists is also Gusev Crater. And so here we have an image not taken from orbit, but taken from the surface, because the Spirit rover is still there, stuck in a sand trap. And they find this particularly fascinating because of one of the things that the Spirit rover discovered. Inadvertently, the Spirit rover went over this one place. You might remember that one of the wheels got stuck. Basically, it was dragging it along, and it was creating these deep furrows. And so here we have an example of that. And so we have it scuffed up this really, really bright soil. And so here we've got Spirit's tracks around the home plate area, and it's scuffed up a bunch of really bright material. Well, then also, in looking at these same areas, here's some of this bright material, here's some of this bright material. These really, really interesting features here. And so, one of the things that they do is they look around, you know, if you want to understand what's going on other planets, you kind of compare it to what we already know. And we already know what's going on Earth. And so, one of the things that they do is they thought, okay, what's an analog for that? The analog, they found an analog for this site in the Atacama Desert. This is not Gusev Crater in the Columbia Hills, but this is in the Atacama Desert. This is an analog site for that. Hot springs. Hot springs. With a lot of deposition going on as things precipitate out of the very saturated water. And when they make a direct comparison between the images on Mars on the left with the images of these same features in the Atacama Desert on the right, they're almost a perfect match for this very silica-rich nodules that were formed in these hot springs. And not only were they formed there, but there's almost this relationship with the bacteria that was in there that influenced the way that these structures were formed. Taking a microscopic look, because there was a hand lens, a microscopic hand lens on the Spirit rover. And so they were able to get some very up-close looks. And so they, in comparing with this handlings on Mars, with looking at microscopic images of these features from the Atacama, they bear an uncanny resemblance to one another. And so they're very interested in potentially sending Mars Rover 2020 back there to do some further investigating and see exactly what's going on there. Because the instruments on this next rover will be sufficient to be able to see whether to detect signs of ancient life. Mars Exploration Rover Opportunity is still working away, and so right now, so it's been a long time hanging out in this place called Marathon Valley. It's now moved up here. It's now sitting on the crater rim about right here, and it is projected to come down here over the next few months. There is a gully right here, which, if you take a close look at it, see all these features here, it's kind of like, wow, look at that. If we saw that on Earth, what would we say? Stream course, dry wash, yeah. And so that's the goal, is to send Opportunity down there over the next year or so and investigate this gully, and then eventually go out onto the crater plains. Well, Curiosity's not done yet either. Curiosity's going to be moving further up Mount Sharp, going further down through the sedimentary column on Mars, and investigating further to see what else it can find. So what do we know about these places? So Earth, Mars. We kind of like both places. We have a preference for one over the other because that's where we currently live. So what do we know about these when we kind of compare them? Well, Mars is smaller. But it turns out that a day is about the same length. A Martian year is about twice as long as that on Earth. The day is about the same length. They both tilt about the same, which means they both have seasons. We have a very large moon. Mars has two tiny moons, which are really probably just captured asteroids. Mars is a little bit further from the sun. Earth is warm. Mars is cold, really cold. You know, we'll get up above freezing at some point. Not very often, but enough that Mars is in the habitable zone around our star. Both Earth and Mars are in the habitable zone, which is a good thing. If Mars had been a little bit bigger, maybe it would have been a twin to Earth. Maybe it would have had an atmosphere like we have. That's really what sustains us, is our atmosphere. Mars doesn't have one to speak of. And that's the interesting thing too. One of the discoveries of Curiosity is there is carbon dioxide in the Martian atmosphere, but this is one of the recent things that Curiosity's discovered, is that they have found a dearth of carbonates. They are not finding carbonates in the rocks. And so what does this tell them? They know that there was water. The rocks that are there unquestionably were deposited in water that Curiosity is looking at. But the lack of carbonates tells them that there is very little carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. To make carbonates, you need to have enough carbon dioxide. So here's a quandary. They don't think that there is enough carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. You know, this is one idea. And they're going to have to find this out. They need to investigate more. There perhaps was not enough carbon dioxide in the Martian atmosphere to warm it sufficiently so that liquid water was sustainable on the surface. Wow. And yet the rocks tell us a different story. But Mars' atmosphere does have methane, little bits. And one of the things that we know is that methane is a far more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Earth is wet. Mars is dry. Until recently, this was fairly typical in our state. Not so much this week, anyway. If you were to dig into the side of it, you would notice that all the little grains of sand, surrounded by sand, but all the grains are rounded. And if you looked at this, and if you saw this side by side, you think, well, gee, what do you notice about the pebbles in both of these images, side by side images? They're both what? Rounded. Where do you get rounded pebbles? Where do you make rounded pebbles? Streams, beaches, things like that. Well, this first image, this one on Mars, this was, I think it came from one of the early sites that Curiosity looked at within the first 6 months that it landed. That's a remarkable thing. Curiosity's one of its main missions was to look for signs that water had existed on the surface, and that was one of the very first things it discovered within the first 6 months. So mission accomplished, and so everything else since then is refining that idea. So all of these features on Mars, we've been looking at this. Here's another comparison between a fossilized delta on Mars and a delta on Earth. How do you make deltas? Well, here's how an alluvial fan gets made. All this stuff washing down from up above. And you end up having all these little layers that are formed within these deltas, within these alluvial fans. And you even have these features called crossbedding. And so some of you might have seen these if you go to places like Zion National Park. Crossbedding is a very prominent thing. I've actually got a picture of it here soon. But if you look at this vast stack of material on Mount Sharp in Gale Crater that Curiosity is climbing through, you notice that virtually all of these rocks feature these very fine laminae and crossbedding, much as you find if you dug into a beach or an alluvial fan on Earth. And so here we have digging into some things, and so you can see, here's this in Zion, you can see this crossbedding. You can see this crossbedding in this beach. You can see these layers here. These are a little bit more solidified. And if you look on these Martian rocks, you see much the same thing in cross-section that's been eroded on these. It's hard to argue with analogies like this. In recent news, here's a rock that Curiosity's looked at just in the last few weeks. And if you look at it, you see kind of these interesting pattern of cracks. We've seen these patterns before in places like this. And fossilized in 150-year-old rocks from the Jurassic. Same pattern carrying over for all of these. And so, yet another piece of evidence that there was some standing water that was evaporating and drying and desiccating out the ground and breaking it up into these little polygons, I guess you could say. And so really the only conclusion that we can come to is that Mars was once wet. Although there's evidence that Mars is still wet. And so a little over a year ago, this was big in the news, these recurring slope lineae. That's what they call these. And so what they do is they saw seasonal variations in these streaks on these sides of these cliffs and these slopes. And they posited that it's very, very briny liquids that are able to remain liquid even at very, very cold temperatures. It turns out that there are glaciers on Mars, even in mid-latitudes. And so they're able to recognize that, here's a lobe of a glacier on Mars, here's an Earth analog. Here you can see the edge lobes of glaciers that are filling these craters. Look how flat these are. And then you can almost, see these edges here to this.
What is that ice made of? Ice,
water, covered, no. No, this is ice water ice. Although there's a lot of carbon dioxide ice on Mars. So the South Polar Cap is mainly carbon dioxide, North Polar Cap is mainly water ice. Well, Mars continues to fascinate us. And so here we've got, we're fascinated, and we like to think about it, we like to portray this, we continue to portray Mars in various ways in our media, in the films that we go to and enjoy. So what's next? Well, we've got a lot of future explorations that are in mind. Airplanes on Mars, balloons on Mars, looking at what's going on under the surface, returning samples from Mars. There's still mysteries. Is there life, or was there ever life on Mars? Is it potentially habitable? Are there enough resources there that we could tap into and actually survive there? Martian weather and global dust storm formation. We don't understand how that works. The Mars dichotomy. Why are the northern and southern hemispheres so different? We don't fully understand that. It probably has something to do with a large impactor, but we don't fully understand that. So I think we better go. I think we better go to really find out. That's really the only way that we're going to answer many of these questions. And a lot of people think, oh, let's just send robots. That's better than sending humans. And that's good. A lot of what the rovers have accomplished, Curiosity's been up there for 4.5 years now. A human geologist could have done the same thing that rover's done in a fraction of the time. I was originally a geologist. I'd love to go play geologist up there. I think that would be a wonderful thing to do. Except that even the sedimentary rocks apparently have the composition of basalt, and so it would be kind of a boring chemistry to some extent. So once we do go, and I want to read this to you, because in the last scene at the end of the Martian Chronicles, a family sets out to go see the Martians. I've always wanted to see a Martian, said Michael. Where are they, Dad? You promised. There they are, said Dad, and he shifted Michael on his shoulder and pointed straight down. The Martians were there. Timothy began to shiver. The Martians were there in the canal, reflected in the water. Timothy and Michael and Robert and Mom and Dad. The Martians stared back up at them for a long, long silent time from the rippling water. One of the most marvelous PSAs that NASA has ever done is this. Where's my sound guy? That's a 10-year-old PSA. Well, thank you very much. How about that? 1 minute, 1 second, 30. 1 hour, 1 minute, 30 seconds. That's not too bad. Questions?
Could not the rounded rocks, especially because they look small, have been blown around by the wind and thereby rounded instead of having water?
Oh, sure. They could have been. And that's one of the things that if you go out into really windy places and find ventifacts, that's what they call. But generally, it would have to get tumbled a bit so that it would round it. Ventifacts usually, because there's prevailing winds in one direction, usually they have one flat side, and they have found ventifacts on Mars, and so there are some that are up there that they, I just don't have a picture of it, so, but they're not hard to find. You could go to Death Valley and find a whole bunch there too. So.
So the International Astronomical Union calls that bump on Mars the oldest mob. And the planetary scientists call it Mount Sharp. Can you teach the
Well, I'm not sure that that's a controversy. That's just, do you want to speak English or do you want to speak Latin? So I don't know, that doesn't answer the question, does it? So what would you like to comment?
I mean, the official nomenclature is Aeolus Mons.
I agree. But, for some reason, we like speaking English rather than Latin. So.
Do we know what percentage of the surface of Mars shows trace of past water?
That's a really good question. What trace of, what percentage of Earth's surface shows signs of past water?
I imagine 100.
Yeah, and so if you go out to some places, is it easily identifiable? And so in a lot of places it's not. And so I guess it, that's a really interesting question. And so I don't have an answer. I can try and make one out, as I'm trying to do right now, but I'm not doing very well at it. But I don't know. That's a really good question. I would guess that if there's liquid water there, that much like Earth, that water has influenced a great deal of the landscape on Earth, that chances are that it also influenced a great deal of what's on Mars. It's just that it's been a very, very long time since that water was there. And so, and I was thinking about this, that the last time the last time that they posit water was on Mars was, we're talking 2-3 billion years ago. Water does not existed in any, large state. And so, if you think about the stacks of sediments in Mount Sharp, and that's a big stack of sediments. And so, here would be a potential objection that somebody could say, well, gee, that was a long time ago. How'd you get all those sediments? That wasn't very much time. Well, then you could think, well, that's just been the last 2.5 billion years. Mars has been around just as long as Earth, 4.5 billion years. And so, if you think of the Grand Canyon and that huge mile-deep stack, but that mile-deep stack accumulated in only 200 million years. A lot of the rocks here in the San Francisco area, a lot of sedimentary ones, they accumulated in a far shorter time because of a lot of the erosion, casting off of the active plate boundary and accumulating, because a lot of the Grand Canyon sediments were more deep water sediments. They weren't in a nearshore environment with a lot of infusion of sediments. And so a lot of the thousands and thousands of feet of sediments that are here in the Bay Area were probably on the order of maybe 20 million years. When you think about the Columbia River basalts that were erupted, and here you have thousands of feet worth of basalts that were erupted over the space of 5 or 6 million years. So it doesn't take that long to create a lot of things. And the fact that we have some of these vestiges of some of these after 2 billion years is, I guess, a testament that it doesn't have plate tectonics, and it's not erasing the evidence, which on Earth, a great deal of the evidence has been erased, and Mars, most of it's still there. Do I see a hand way in the back, or is that something?
Thank Brian for this wonderful talk. It's a picture of Mars.